The process of drafting a new constitution has started. This follows an agreement between the United Nations Special Envoy for Syria and opposition co-chairs for the Syrian Constitutional Committee. The committee, comprising 45 representatives of Syria's government, opposition and civil society, has a mandate to draw up a new basic law leading to UN-supervised elections. Special Envoy Geir Pedersen said its Syrian co-chairs, who he met together for the first time ahead of a week-long talks, had agreed to prepare and start drafting constitutional reform. The talks, the sixth round in 2 years and the first since January for the drafting committee, will discuss clear principles, he told reporters in Geneva, without elaborating. The decade-old war, which spiraled out of an uprising against President Bashar al-Assad's rule, sparked the world's biggest refugee crisis. Syria's neighbor hosts 5.6 million refugees, and European countries more than 1 million. And political and public affairs commentator Otunba Olabode Oseni joins me for more on this development. Good to have you join us.
Thank you very much for having me.
So after more than a decade of war in Syria and after several attempts to come up with a constitutional committee that will work on constitutional reforms. If we remember in 2018, how the Sochi constitutional reform or constitutional committee was rejected. But it does seem now that this committee is making a headway. What do you make of this?
Let's start by going back a little bit. It's a history of a country that was run by an authoritarian Assad. When he passed on, his son took over from the government, and it got to a point where corruption was the order of the day. And obviously, some people or some politicians who are not corrupt, they started agitating to find a way to remove the President Assad. And because he refused, typical of some of the developing countries, they will not want to remove until when they remove them. So unfortunately, 15th of March 2011, the war started. And this is a war that has now cost almost about 500,000 lives, and about 13-point-something million displaced people. And thank God that now countries like Russia, Turkey, Iran, and a little bit of America have now brokered a deal with the opposition to start talking. And like another thing in politics, no matter how much you kill each other, at the end of the day, you always need to come back to sit down on the round table and discuss maybe cause and causes of problem. And that's where we are now.
And it's interesting you mentioned Russia, because I was going to ask you to what extent you think that Russia has influence in terms of pressure on the Assad regime to allow for this to continue in terms of the constitutional review committee or reform committee.
Yes, again, Russia, America, and which other country, maybe UK, they have always been interested in getting involved in countries that are not settled, countries that are not giving their citizens good governance. And Russia has always championed, been on the side of authoritarian governments in developing countries, because it's also a country with a kind of a mini democratic authoritarian rule. So the influence of Russia cannot be overemphasized, because they have always been the one supplying government Assad all the necessary military ways he needs when other countries in the West refuse to support him. So it has been the government of Russia and I think Iran and Turkey was the one supply. So that is where they have the influence, because it's become a case of he who gives you these can dictate what you have to do. So that's exactly where I think Russia comes in.
And that's why I was just going to ask you, because there seems to be a lot of influence here, especially from Russia. But let's talk about the Constitution Committee and how optimistic you are that there will be no interference from the Assad regime when it comes to this committee.
I'm not too sure about that, because like another thing, most of the representatives, about 45 member as we speak, the number might increase, they're not going to decrease. So the people from the national coalition, that is the opposition, and the government itself, they will have to deliberate, and then take orders. That's the way I look at it, from their respective sides. The number of people that are going to represent the government, we have to definitely will take orders from the government, and the opposition people will also come up with their own ideas of what to do and what they are looking for. Hopefully, usually the beginning might be a little bit rough, because like I said, we are talking of two opposing sides. The differences will always be there. So it's just going to be a case of how easy they're going to find a kind of a compromise, meeting in the middle, and then they maybe probably make a way forward. But as it is now, everything is peaceful. Judging from the UN ambassador, Geir Pedersen, is coordinating things. Hopefully, he's going to succeed. But from all of things are going very well.
This is a great contribution. Like you said, things are going well, and it is a great contribution to the political process, but it doesn't necessarily solve the political crisis. What more do you think can be done beyond this step to ensure that this political crisis and the humanitarian crisis in that country are resolved?
Ordinarily, an outsider would have really loved to see a kind of a truce. And I think the truce is the last almost 9 months, things have been getting better. They have been less violent. But then again, the huge amount of problem with millions of people that are displaced, these are also going to be a fundamental part of the discussion that need to be brought in the constitution, how they're going to deal with it and all that kind of thing. But the way things are, again, we would not be able to adjudge or come up with a final conclusion as what the outcome is going to be, because the talks is about to start. It is when and during the discussion of the drafting of new constitution that will meet the needs of Syrians, both in government and the opposition, that anybody can say this is what is going to happen. It's very difficult to say in advance, because they're yet to start talking. But, even though the platform, the table is already set.
And that's why, because it's difficult to tell, that's why we will be monitoring this development. Political and public affairs commentator Otunba Olabode Oseni, always good to have your insight on these issues.